That's how you do it, Mark. I'm very impressed. Good evening and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Distinguished guests, it's really good to have the Mayor here, other councillors are here, other staff from other departments of council are here, and all the rest of you who fit into the distinguished guests category. I'm Mike Collett, I'm the Head of Customer Services at the Library. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to MC this exhibition tonight, Guts, God and Gold, Dunedin in the 1860s. I was really worried about slipping up over that. This is our first Read Gallery exhibition for 2011, and of course this year is a very significant one in the history of our city, marking the 150th anniversary of the discovery of gold in Otago by Gabriel Read. And as we all know, the rush which followed transformed Dunedin beyond recognition in just a very few years. Guts, Gold and God has been jointly curated by 6 staff from the Heritage Collections, which is unusual really. I think our exhibitions often have input from more than one staff member, more than Anthony, but it's unusual to have 6 staff members working on this together, each of whom wrote on a topic that caught their imagination. And that's Lorraine Johnston, our Heritage Collections librarian, Anthony Tedeschi, our Rare Books librarian, and senior library assistants in the Heritage Collections, Malcolm Deans, Cheryl Hamlin, Jackie McMillan and Dallas Sumner. I think I had a chance, of course, to have a look through this afternoon, and I think that they've done a fantastic job, and it's a really diverse range of material. And it's broader, I think, than our exhibitions usually are, really. They've got, I made a quick note, they've got books, journals, diaries, newspapers and letters, directories, maps, prints, photographs and land title deeds. I'm really fond of a little photo over in the corner of a theatre, a Dunedin theatre in the early 1860s, which came from the settlers as well. So I urge you all to have a look at that when you get a chance to go around and have a look at the exhibition. It's just a fantastic photo. And as always with these exhibitions, they're a team effort, and there are a number of other library staff who have also worked on this one. So thanks go to the library's graphic designer, Annalise Douglas, who I don't think is here tonight, for her contribution to the look of the exhibition, including the catalogue here. And a very, very stylish banner, which you'll be able to see from tomorrow on the ground floor of the library, which we use to promote the exhibitions on the 3rd floor, and the exhibition's officially open tomorrow, and that banner will be there, and I urge you to have a look at that, it's really lovely. And also to Kathleen McCarthy and the bindery team, who we couldn't do without. Kath's not here, but members of the bindery team are. And they were short-staffed over this period, and they worked with tremendous professionalism to get the supports for the items made and to get the captions mounted in time. Finally, I'm going to thank the Settlers Museum, who have loaned us some items from their collections. And it's tremendous to have another institution within the DCC umbrella that we can go to for material for objects, particularly in photos, that we don't tend to have in our collections. So that's pretty much it from me. I now get the pleasure and the honour of introducing our speaker tonight, Emeritus Professor at the University of Otago. Eric Olsen is one of our preeminent social historians. He has contributed to the research and writing of New Zealand history over a sustained period, publishing his first book, John A. Lee, in 1977. His history of Otago has been described as one of New Zealand's best regional histories. It's certainly got a fabulous cover.
That all you've looked
at. Well, the REDFEDS, Revolutionary Industrial Unionism and the New Zealand Federation of Labour, 1908 to 1914, is a classic account of labour history, and it is. In 1978, Professor Olsen instigated the Caversham Project, New Zealand's most sophisticated community history, focusing on one Dunedin suburb. It is probably the largest social history project in Australasia and has resulted in a number of publications with still more to come and attracted significant international interest. Professor Olsen has served on numerous policy and advisory committees at national level, including membership of the Turnbull Library Trust Board. He was elected an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit in 2002. Professor Olsen.
Thank you very much for those kind words. I'm glad you like the cover. Of course, the public library's got the name of the cover. However, we won't talk about that. Thank you very much for this invitation. I must say, as I walked in and saw Annie Prue was the doors opening at 5:30, thought, oh, well, I might be here with Anthony. So I'm slightly flabbergasted and pleased to see so many couldn't get into Annie Prue. had to come and hear me. Guts, God, and gold. I had to read that about 3 times, really. I think being a miner probably did take guts. It's not a word you hear often anymore, let alone see in print. You can hear almost any other word, oddly enough, especially on television. Well, 150 years ago, give or take, Gabriel Read discovered enough gold at Tuapeka to claim the reward, which is what he really wanted. And over the next 3 years, as has already been said, and as you all know, many of you as well as I do, Dunedin and Otago were to be transformed by an invasion, largely, but not exclusively, from Europe, overwhelmingly from Britain, but also including large numbers from other countries of Northern Europe. The largest number of Irish Catholics, of course, in the South Island at that point, and outside of Auckland, the largest number in the entirety of New Zealand. And of course, before very much longer, people were to come also from China. And so, a sort of remarkably eclectic mix of people were to be recruited by the desire either to find gold or to make money out of supplying those who wanted to find gold. They were overwhelmingly young, and they were overwhelmingly energetic. And it remains a sort of exciting moment in our history. And I've only got 10 to 12 minutes to do this history, so it's going to be very succinct. But it remains a very exciting and dynamic moment. And I think the exhibition captures very well, insofar as stationary frozen objects can, the dynamism and the explosive nature of the transformation that occurred. And I looked up an old lecture, I looked up several old lectures actually, as I wondered what I'd say to you. And I quite like this quote still, even though I first came across it 30 or 40 years ago. In every part of the city, that's Dunedin, of course, which was still a relatively small village by international standards. It was to end at about 15,000 persons, which is one of the upper suburbs of Invercargill today. In every part of the city, the accumulation of wealth, as evinced in the numerous magnificent and costly buildings, is observable. There are 2 theatres, large public gardens, it's the Vauxhall Gardens, 2 concert halls, 7 insurance offices, 3 banks, the Bank of New Zealand and the Bank of New South Wales, being 2 of the most costly and elegant buildings in the city. You could still probably say that without getting a very protracted fight. There are 42 hotels, and the number was growing, and restaurants, 2 Masonic and 3 Oddfellows lodges. There's a Garrett Club, Debating Society, Chess Club, Jockey Club, Mechanics Institute, the Building and Land Society, Chamber of Commerce, 3 dailies, 3 weekly newspapers. The gas is laid on all the principal thoroughfares, most of which are now curbed or paved, or even laid down with asphalt. There are 4 new jetties. The Anglicans and the Catholics were about to try to build their cathedrals. Protracted processes, both, not surprisingly. The Wesleyans have built a handsome chapel. The small Jewish community have built a small but handsome synagogue. This was all strong puffery, of course. Progress is what excited them, but progress is certainly what they had, and they had it in spades. And Dunedin came to symbolise, partly I think because they were willing to invest so much in handsome, elegant and costly buildings. Dunedin came to symbolise the way in which a wilderness, a swamp, could be transformed with extraordinary rapidity by 19th century Britons and Europeans more generally. And it wouldn't be long, of course, before they tackled the swamps of southern Dunedin, now regarded with the same horror because of their potential in an earthquake that I think the 19th century, early 19th century Britons regarded. Well, of course, it wasn't all progress. And in that very old lecture, I went on to talk about stagnant pools, the absence of sewerage systems, dead animals in the streets, household waste for which no provision had been made, the absence of clean drinking water, so that the city to some extent rapidly outgrew the infrastructure that the Victorians were coming to realise was essential to the health, happiness and well-being of a modern community. Well, the gold rushes not only, of course, transformed Dunedin, but of course they also transformed the province of Otago, with the provision of roads, towns, bridges, pumps, whatever, which I won't go on about at great length because my time is short. Your patience was probably, I hope, slightly longer than my time. They also created a new culture, which I think continues to shape modern New Zealand. It was, of course, a culture predicated upon democratic values. They didn't mean that everybody should be able to vote, of course, but they did believe that all people should be equal. And the goldfields in particular perhaps emphasised the importance of measuring people by their ability to perform the work they tackled rather than by where they were born, who their parents were, what rank they'd been to, or what school they'd been to, what church they attended. In fact, the gold mining community, in part because it included the full range of the extremes within the British Isles, who in the British Isles very rarely had to live close to each other, transformed these discordant groups, some of them extremely discordant. After all, the giant civil war in Europe between Catholic and Protestant had been going for almost 500 years and was still burning reasonably intensely in parts of Great Britain, especially England, where many Irish also went. They had to create a culture in which people could negotiate these differences as they went around their day-to-day lives. And as they did that, they also found they married across these divisions. They had neighbours from what in the old world have been hostile, even alien groups and communities. And so they create a culture that is democratic, that is broadly egalitarian, and that was, and this they were most proud of, broadly cosmopolitan and tolerant. They were also, I think it's got to be said, a reasonably law-abiding and respectable gold rush compared to those in California or even parts of Australia. Indeed, I once wrote a learned paper demonstrating, to my satisfaction, and that of one or two other people, as is the way with scholars, that the miners in Otago particularly had learnt well from the mistakes that the Australians have made in particular. That's something I think all New Zealanders can take pride in. Established a national tradition, which we're still perhaps occasionally proud. This was particularly true on the goldfields, where of course in Australia the discontent of the miners, especially with the way policing was undertaken, had led to the Eureka Rebellion and was to lead over the next 20 or 30 years to quite large and violent clashes, often targeting Chinese, but not only Chinese. In Otago, we recruited our goldfield wardens from Victoria, the reformed Victorian system. We recruited the police from the reformed Victorian system. And in fact, the police ran a sort of informal gauntlet on the walls to turn around anybody they didn't particularly want because of their criminal reputations on the other side of the ditch. This was illegal, but nonetheless seems to have been reasonably effective. And criminals from Australia were excoriated rather than worshipped. There's a little story that I particularly like that George Griffiths told in his biography of Rees, one of the early run holders, that I think summarises much of what is attractive about the culture of the gold rushes. It perhaps doesn't capture the law-abidingness that I've mentioned, but which was something that was very important to them. But the story of Rees is riding around his run, inspecting his flocks, and he comes across a miner in the act of killing one of Rees's sheep. And he sort of says, "What ho, my good man, you know, what are you doing with my sheep?" And the miner looks at him and says, I'm killing it because it tried to bite me. Any sheep that tries to bite me, I'll bloody well kill it. Rees rode off, trying to suppress the hysterical laughter he felt coming upon him. And in that story and Rees's response to the miner, I think one captures a sense of a dynamic, a lively, inventive and colourful culture that we inherit, whether we live in Dunedin or Goldfields of Otago. I think also this vast and unexpected wealth, not altogether welcome by everyone. Some of the Presbyterians regarded gold as something of a moral disaster. After all, getting rich without having to work for it, which is how some thought of it, could only lead to very unfortunate consequences. But by and large, they were to translate this wealth, whether they approved of the gold or didn't approve of the gold, into a society which attempted to emulate, as best they could, the best of what they'd left behind, and to leave behind the worst, or those things they thought of as the worst. And so Dunedin, in a very short period of time, was to become, as it were, as I said in another less learned paper, without footnotes, a sort of a place of competition between very distinguished architects and architectural firms, which was to vastly enrich the urban landscape, not only of Dunedin, but of other towns such as Oamaru, Lawrence, in particular, spring to mind. It was a decade, of course, in which not only banks and insurance companies, but stock and station companies, manufactories, were also to flourish and expand. Gold and, of course, a much larger market underpinned the growth. By the 1870s, I think most people in Otago, whatever their original attitude had been toward the discovery of gold, rejoiced that it had been discovered, that Otago had been lucky enough to attract such an extraordinary, energetic, vital, dynamic, new population, which had, as it were, as they thought of it, civilized and transformed the wilderness into smiling homesteads, happy farms, glowing wheat stalks, lowing cattle. And it was, of course, a remarkable transformation that's very easy to underestimate. Not all were equally partners of the feast, of course, as we know, and those who've been wont to live in this land before the arrival of these highly energetic visitors were particularly to suffer. Nonetheless, they were also in the long run perhaps to benefit from the way in which these immigrants, led by the miners, but not all of the miners, were to create a society in which people did learn to negotiate differences of religion, nationality, social class, and live together peacefully and lawfully. So by I'm not sure what I meant to say by way of dedicating the exhibition. It's been opened. Am I opening?
I think you're right.
Anyway, am I opening? Yes. The exhibition is now open. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. And come back and see it again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Olsen, for giving us that, I should call it a thumbnail sketch, but a quick overview of the impact of gold and the effect of the changes that it brought to our city. And now I just urge you to stay on and have a look at the exhibition and have a drink and have something to eat and enjoy yourself. Thank you all.